When I was 14, my life fell apart in an instant. I remember that day vividly. It was overcast, the wind rattled the tree branches outside, and the house was filled with a heavy silence. My parents called me and my younger brother Alex into the living room. We sat on the worn-out couch while Mom and Dad stood in front of us, exchanging nervous glances. "We need to talk," Mom began, wringing her hands. "This is very difficult for us to say, but we can no longer support you financially." Dad nodded in agreement. "We found a good family for you. They'll be able to take care of you better than we can." At first, I didn't fully grasp what they were saying. My parents were giving us away? Just like that? What? I blurted out. "Are you joking?" Alex squeezed my hand. He was only 10, and though he didn't completely understand what was happening, he could sense something was very wrong. "We're so sorry," Mom whispered, avoiding my gaze. I screamed at them, demanding answers, but they just kept repeating the same story. The money had run out, and they had no other choice. A week later, Alex and I stood in front of a strange house, our suitcases in hand. I barely remembered the drive here. It was all a blur of tears, fear, and despair. The door opened, and a woman in her 40s appeared. She smiled warmly. "You must be Kate and Alex. I'm Mrs. Harrison, and this is my husband, Tom. Welcome." Her voice was gentle, but all I wanted was to go home. The first few weeks with the Harrisons were unbearable. Their house was cozy, bright, and smelled of baked goods and coffee, but I hated it. I refused to talk to Mrs. Harrison, her husband, or even the other foster kids living there. Sam, a sarcastic 16-year-old boy, and Lily, a quiet 12-year-old girl with huge, curious eyes. Alex adjusted quickly. He played with Lily, told Mrs. Harrison about his favorite superheroes, and even started calling her Aunt Sarah. I, on the other hand, locked myself in my room, skipped meals, and ignored everyone. Then things got even worse. One evening, I overheard Sam talking to Mrs. Harrison in the living room. "She's not going to stay here long. She doesn't want to be part of the family." I froze behind the door. "She just needs more time," Mrs. Harrison said calmly. "She's been through a lot." "We've all been through a lot," Sam muttered. He wasn't wrong. I was being selfish, but I couldn't help it. Then something happened that shattered what little I had left. One day, I found my old phone buried in my belongings. I charged it and turned it on, only to find dozens of messages, not from my parents, but from their friends. There were photos, Mom and Dad lounging on a beach in Miami, then on a yacht in Italy, dining in expensive restaurants. Money? They hadn't abandoned us because of money. They just didn't want us anymore. I threw the phone against the floor, shattering it. Mrs. Harrison heard the noise and rushed into the room. "What happened?" I looked up at her, my eyes filled with tears. "They lied. They just abandoned us." Mrs. Harrison stepped closer and wrapped her arms around me. At first, I stiffened, but then I gave in. That night, for the first time, I cried on someone else's shoulder. The moment I realized my parents were never coming back for me, something inside me shifted. I had spent months waiting, hoping they would call, send a letter, explain themselves. But after seeing those photos of them living their perfect, expensive life without us, I knew the truth. They had moved on. And if they could do it, so could I. I made a decision that night. I was done waiting. Done hoping. From that moment on, I would build my own life on my own terms. The first step was school. I had always been a decent student, but now I threw myself into my studies with a new intensity. I stayed up late reading, taking notes, asking teachers for extra work. My grades shot up. My foster parents, the Harrisons, noticed and encouraged me, but I didn't do it for them. I did it for myself. At the same time, I started working. I got a job at a local diner, working the evening shift after school. It was exhausting. My feet ached from standing, and my arms were sore from carrying trays, but I refused to complain. Every dollar I earned was a step toward independence. That's when I met Lauren. Lauren worked at the diner too. She was a year older than me, full of energy, with wild curls and a laugh that could make anyone smile. She wasn't just friendly, she was smart. Sharp. One night, during a slow shift, she sat down across from me in the break room and said, "You know, working for tips forever isn't the way out. You gotta make your money work for you." I stared at her. "What does that even mean?" Lauren grinned. "It means if you want to be free, really free, you need to understand money. Not just how to make it, but how to grow it." That conversation changed everything. Lauren introduced me to the world of financial literacy. She showed me books, online courses, podcasts, anything that could teach me how money worked. I had never thought about investments, saving strategies, or business before. But the more I learned, the more I realized. This was my way out. While my classmates spent their free time watching movies or going to parties, I was reading about stocks, budgeting, and entrepreneurship. I started experimenting, first with small savings goals, then with small investments. Every paycheck I earned at the diner I divided, some for necessities, some for savings, and a little for learning how to make more. Then something unexpected happened. One day, I came home to find my foster brother Sam, staring at his laptop, looking frustrated. "What's wrong?" I asked, grabbing a bottle of water from the fridge. He sighed. "I'm trying to sell these custom sneakers online, but I suck at marketing. No one's buying." I glanced at his screen. He had an online shop, but it looked terrible. No good photos, no clear descriptions, no branding. Let me try, I said. I had been learning about online businesses, and this was the perfect chance to apply what I knew. I revamped his store, improved the product descriptions, changed the layout, and even created an Instagram page to market the sneakers. A week later, Sam made his first big sale. That was the moment I realized I had a skill. If I could help Sam sell sneakers, I could help others. I started offering my services to small businesses. At first, it was just local shops, helping them improve their websites or manage social media. But soon word spread. People started reaching out, asking for help. And the best part? They were willing to pay. By the time I was finishing high school, I had a side business growing right under my nose. I wasn't making a fortune, but I was making enough to prove that this could be something real. That's when I set my next goal, college. There was no way I could afford tuition, so I went all in on scholarships. I wrote essays, applied for grants, and reached out to every program that offered financial aid. I treated it like a full-time job. The day I got the acceptance letter with a full scholarship was the first time in years that I cried from happiness. I had done it. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building something. I hadn't thought about my parents in years, and I had no reason to. They were nothing more than distant memories, people who had once been a part of my life but had chosen to remove themselves from it when they abandoned Alex and me. I had spent so much time healing, growing, and learning to live without them that when I finally did hear from them again, it almost didn't feel real. It started with an email, a simple subject line that read, "Kate, we need to talk." At first, I thought it was spam, some automated message meant for someone else, but when I clicked on it and saw my mother's name at the bottom, my entire body went cold. "Katie, sweetheart, we've been looking for you and Alex for so long. Please call us. We miss you both terribly." There was no explanation, no apology, no acknowledgement of what they had done, just a generic, almost robotic attempt to reach out as if nothing had happened. I stared at the email for a long time, debating whether or not to respond, but in the end, I closed my laptop and ignored it. They had made their choices years ago, and I had no interest in reopening old wounds for their convenience. But ignoring them didn't mean they would go away. A few days after the email, I started getting calls from unknown numbers, one after another, at all hours of the day and night. At first, I let them go to voicemail, refusing to engage, but after the 10th missed call in a single afternoon, I finally picked up. "Hello." I answered cautiously, already bracing myself. "Katie." Finally. My mother's voice was sickeningly familiar, yet it felt like hearing a stranger speak. There was forced excitement in her tone, a false warmth that I could see through immediately. I didn't bother with pleasantries. "What do you want?" There was a long pause before she finally spoke again, her voice quieter this time, as if she were trying to sound wounded. "Is that any way to speak to your mother?" I clenched my jaw, already regretting answering the phone. "You are not my mother," I said, my voice firm and unwavering. "Katie, please," she said, suddenly desperate. "We need help. Things have been difficult. Your father and I made some bad investments, and we lost a lot of money. We have nothing left." And there it was. After years of silence, after choosing luxury and travel over their own children, they had finally come crawling back. Not out of love, not out of regret, but because they needed something from me. I exhaled slowly, gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. "Let me get this straight," I said, forcing myself to stay calm. "You abandoned Alex and me so you could live your dream life. You spent all your money on expensive trips, designer clothes, and yachts. And now that you're broke, you suddenly want to reconnect." "Katie, that's not fair," she shot back, her voice turning defensive. "We were struggling too. You have no idea what we've been through." I almost laughed at the absurdity of it all. "I was 14, I said, my voice dripping with venom. "Alex was 10. We had no one. And now you expect me to feel sorry for you. After everything we did for you, this is how you repay us," she snapped, her voice sharp and accusing. I could feel the rage bubbling inside me, the years of betrayal, loneliness, and pain threatening to boil over. "You did nothing for me," I said through gritted teeth. "I built this life on my own. I owe you nothing." I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking as I threw my phone onto the couch. I thought that would be the end of it, that they would realize they weren't going to get anything from me and finally disappear. I should have known better. A few days later, Alex called me in the middle of the night, his voice shaky and filled with panic. "They found me," he said, barely above a whisper. "They showed up outside my dorm. They waited for me." My stomach dropped. "What did they say?" "They acted like everything was normal," he said, his voice laced with disbelief. "Mom was crying. Dad kept saying they just wanted to talk. But then they started asking about money. They told me that if we don't help them, they'll be homeless." I clenched my fists, my entire body rigid with anger. "We are not responsible for them," I said firmly. "They made their choice. They need to live with it." Alex hesitated, and for a brief second, I could hear the doubt in his voice. "Do you think we're being too harsh?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady my emotions. "No," I said without hesitation. "They didn't just abandon us. They erased us from their lives. They didn't care if we had food, shelter, or if we even survived. They only care now because they need something." He was quiet for a long time before he finally exhaled. "You're right," he said, his voice steadier. "I won't answer them again." But just when I thought they couldn't sink any lower, I woke up to find my name plastered all over the internet. Successful young entrepreneur abandons her parents in their time of need. I stared at the article in disbelief, reading the words over and over again, hoping I had imagined it. The piece painted them as victims, struggling parents who had sacrificed everything for their ungrateful daughter, only to be cast aside when they needed her most. My mother had even given an interview, her face tear-streaked as she said, "We raised her with love, and now she treats us like we're nothing." They had manipulated the entire world into thinking I was the villain. I scrolled through the comments, my stomach twisting. "She's heartless. Ungrateful brat. People like her forget where they came from." I shut my laptop with so much force that it nearly broke. My phone started buzzing with messages. Friends, colleagues, reporters, all asking for a comment. Lauren called me, her voice urgent. "Kate, we need to do damage control. We can issue a statement. Set the record straight." "No," I interrupted, my voice firm. "I'm not explaining myself to anyone. Let them think whatever they want." But my parents still weren't done. 2 weeks later, I received a letter from a lawyer. They were suing me for financial support. I had heard of cases like this before, where some states allowed parents to demand money from their adult children, but I never thought they would actually try it. I immediately contacted my own lawyer, who assured me they had no legal ground to stand on. "They abandoned you as minors," she said. "No court will take their side." That should have been enough to make me feel safe, but it wasn't. The final straw came when they waited for me outside my office. I saw them the second I stepped outside, standing next to my car like they belonged there. My father took a step forward. "Kate, we need to talk." I didn't stop walking. "No, we don't. We're your parents," my mother pleaded. "We made mistakes, but we're still family." I finally stopped and turned to look at them, my expression unreadable. "Family doesn't abandon each other. Family doesn't manipulate and threaten. You made your choice years ago. Now live with it." My father's face twisted in anger. "We should have never had kids." I stared at him, waiting for the pain to hit me, waiting for the words to sting. But they didn't. Instead, I felt relief. Without another word, I turned and walked away, leaving them behind for good. Graduating from college felt like stepping into the world I had fought so hard to reach, but instead of feeling relief, I felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility because I had spent years pushing myself, studying late into the night, taking on internships, and learning everything I could about finance. And now, as I stood in a high-rise office in New York City, shaking hands with the CEO of one of the top financial firms in the country, I realized that this was only the beginning of an entirely new chapter in my life, one that I had built from the ground up without the help of the people who were supposed to support me but had instead abandoned me when I was just a child. "Welcome to the team, Kate," the CEO said with a firm handshake, his expression one of approval and confidence as he handed me my official contract, a document that confirmed my new position as a financial strategist with a six-figure starting salary of $180,000 per year, a number that felt almost surreal considering that just a few years ago, I had been a broke teenager working night shifts at a diner, wondering if I would ever be able to afford a life of stability, let alone success. I threw myself into my work with the same relentless determination that had carried me through college, arriving at the office earlier than anyone else, staying later than I needed to, networking with top executives, and taking on projects that most new hires would have avoided out of fear of making mistakes. But I refused to let fear dictate my career, and within a year, I was leading client meetings on my own, advising multi-million-dollar companies on investment strategies, and quickly making a name for myself in an industry where only the strongest survived. Yet despite the rapid success and financial security, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still working for someone else's dream instead of my own, and that realization hit me hardest when I was assigned to a major client, a mid-sized tech startup struggling to scale efficiently. Because as I developed a financial growth plan for them, restructuring their investments, negotiating better contracts, and guiding them into their first major round of venture capital funding, I watched their revenue triple within months, and the CEO personally thanked me, telling me that I had saved his company. But instead of feeling satisfied, I found myself thinking, if I can do this for them, why can't I do it for myself? That thought became the catalyst for the biggest decision of my career because at 26, despite the security of a high-paying job, I walked into my boss's office and handed in my resignation, knowing that I was taking an enormous risk, but also knowing that I was more than capable of succeeding on my own, and within weeks, I had officially founded my own financial consulting firm, pouring every dollar of my savings into getting the business off the ground, working 18-hour days to secure clients, build my reputation, and establish myself in a highly competitive industry. And though my first office was nothing more than a cramped, windowless space with a single desk and chair, I didn't care because it was mine, and that was all that mattered. My first few clients were small businesses that needed help optimizing their finances, but word spread quickly, and soon corporations were reaching out to me. CEOs were asking for private consultations, and my team expanded from just me to an entire staff of financial experts, and by the time I turned 28, my firm had gone international with offices in London, Singapore, and Dubai, proving not only to myself but to the world that I was capable of building an empire from nothing. Despite all of my professional success, the thing that meant the most to me had nothing to do with money or career achievements, but rather with the moment I stood in a courtroom at the age of 24, surrounded by the only real family I had ever known, as a judge finalized my adoption by Tom and Sarah Harrison, the people who had taken me in when I had no one, and as I turned to them, my heart pounding with emotions I couldn't fully process, I tried to make a joke to lighten the moment by asking, Are you sure you want a 24-year-old as your new kid? But my voice shook and Sarah, tears glistening in her eyes, pulled me into a hug and whispered, we've always wanted you. And in that moment, I realized that I had finally found the kind of unconditional love and belonging that my biological parents had never been capable of giving me. And soon after, Alex followed in my footsteps by legally changing his last name to Harrison, telling me that he never wanted to be tied to the people who had abandoned us ever again. And I couldn't have agreed more. As my career flourished, my personal life also found stability and love, and when I met Daniel at a finance conference in San Francisco, a corporate lawyer with a sharp mind, an easy sense of humor, and the kind of patience that balanced out my relentless ambition, our relationship grew effortlessly, and 3 years later, he proposed in the most perfect, understated way. Just the two of us on a quiet rooftop in Paris, no cameras, no grand gestures, just a simple "will you marry me?" as he held out a ring, and when I said yes, I knew that this was the future I had fought so hard for, one built on love, trust, and true partnership. But of course, my biological parents had other plans because despite having ignored my existence for years unless they needed money, they suddenly resurfaced when news of my engagement became public, and I woke up one morning to find my name splashed across a news article, the headline reading, "Daughter marries into wealth and refuses to invite her own parents, a family betrayal." I read in disgust as my mother, in a dramatic interview, claimed that she had raised me with love, only for me to turn my back on them in their time of need, painting herself and my father as victims and me as some ungrateful, heartless millionaire who had abandoned the people who had given me life. But while their manipulations might have worked on strangers who didn't know the truth, they had no power over me anymore. And I refused to let them manipulate me into feeling guilt for cutting out people who had never been family to begin with. Their desperation didn't end there because on the day of my wedding, despite being explicitly uninvited, they actually had the audacity to show up at the venue, hoping to cause a scene. But I had anticipated this possibility and had hired security to ensure that my past had no place in my future, and as I was getting ready, one of the coordinators came rushing into the bridal suite, looking flustered as she said, "There's a problem. Your parents are outside and they're demanding to be let in," and I exhaled slowly, refusing to let them ruin my day, before calmly instructing her, "Tell security to handle it, and if they don't leave, call the police." And within minutes, they were escorted off the premises, their final attempt to control me failing spectacularly. As I walked down the aisle, with Tom Harrison proudly walking me to my future, surrounded by the only people who had ever truly loved and supported me, I realized that this wasn't just the beginning of a new life, but the final, irreversible break from my past, because for years, my parents had abandoned me, used me, and tried to manipulate me, but now I was the one leaving them behind forever. And as I stood across from Daniel, about to say my vows, I knew without a doubt that this was the life I had built, the life I had fought for, and the life I deserved. Looking back, it was almost impossible to believe how much had changed because for so many years, I had been consumed by the need to survive, the need to prove to myself and to the world that I was more than the child my parents had thrown away. And yet now, as I stood on the balcony of my dream home, a $2.5 million estate overlooking the rolling hills outside Los Angeles, feeling the cool evening breeze against my skin while watching the city lights flicker in the distance, I knew without a doubt that everything I had fought for had led me to this exact moment, a moment where I could finally say that I had built something entirely my own, something that no one could take from me, something that was the result of my own sacrifices, my own resilience, and my own refusal to let the past define me. But success had never been just about money for me because while financial security had given me freedom, independence, and the ability to dictate my own future, I had always known that real fulfillment came not from the numbers in my bank account but from the impact I could make, the change I could create, and the ability to help others who had been where I once was, trapped in a system that often forgot them, left them behind, and made them feel as if they were nothing more than a burden. Which was why, at the age of 32, I founded the Harrison Foundation, a nonprofit organization with an initial capital of $5 million, dedicated to supporting children in the foster care system by providing them with educational resources, mental health support, financial literacy programs, and scholarships, ensuring that they had the tools to create a future for themselves that no one else could take away. The first time I walked into one of the group homes we partnered with, I was struck by the overwhelming sense of familiarity because even though the walls were different, even though the furniture was older and the faces were new, I knew exactly what it felt like to sit in a place like that, unsure of what would come next, uncertain if anyone truly cared. And when I noticed a young girl, maybe 13, standing off to the side with her arms crossed and her expression guarded, I saw myself in her, the same defiance, the same skepticism, the same silent plea not to be lied to or given false hope. And so instead of offering empty reassurances, I crouched down beside her and simply said, "Hey, I'm Kate. What's your name?" And for a moment, she hesitated, clearly debating whether or not she even wanted to engage. But then she finally muttered, "Jasmine," her voice barely above a whisper, and I gave her a small smile, nodding as I said, "Nice to meet you, Jasmine. You know, I used to live in a place like this," and I watched as her expression flickered between disbelief and curiosity before she scoffed and said, "Yeah, right." To which I simply chuckled, because I knew exactly how she felt. I knew how hard it was to believe that anyone who had truly been through it would ever choose to come back, and so I looked her in the eye and said, "I get it. When I was here, I didn't believe anyone who said they understood either. But I do, and I promise you, this is just a chapter, not the whole story." And in that brief moment, I saw the smallest crack in her walls, a flicker of something that had once seemed impossible to me at her age, hope, and that was when I knew beyond any doubt that this was exactly what I was meant to do. But the foundation wasn't the only way I was telling my story, because for years, Lauren had been pushing me to write a book about my life, and for years, I had resisted, telling her I didn't have the time, the energy, or the desire to relive the past in such painful detail. But after launching the foundation and seeing firsthand how many kids felt invisible, forgotten, and destined to repeat the mistakes of the people who had failed them, I realized that telling my story wasn't about me, it was about them, about every child who had ever felt like they weren't good enough, every teenager who had ever been told they wouldn't amount to anything, and every young adult who had ever questioned whether they were capable of breaking free from the cycle they had been born into, which was why I sat down and for the first time, I wrote it all, every painful moment, every betrayal, every hard-earned victory, and every lesson that had shaped me into the person I had become. And when Unwanted, my journey from abandonment to success, was finally published, I had no expectations, no plans for how it would be received, and yet within weeks, it became a New York Times bestseller, reaching people across the world, resonating with those who had been through their own versions of my story, and bringing in hundreds of letters from survivors of abandonment, from kids still in the system, from young adults trying to find their own path, all telling me how my journey had given them hope, how they had finally felt seen, and how they now believed, for the first time, that they could build something for themselves, too. And while my life flourished, my parents' world collapsed, though not in the way they wanted people to believe, because one day, as I was scrolling through the news, I came across something that almost made me laugh out loud. A GoFundMe campaign titled, "Help Two Loving Parents Rebuild Their Lives," accompanied by a dramatic sob story about how they had lost everything due to circumstances beyond their control, how their cruel, ungrateful children had abandoned them, and how they desperately needed to raise $200,000 in order to get back on their feet. And at first, their campaign gained traction, with strangers donating and leaving sympathetic comments. But then a journalist, likely someone who had read my book and recognized their names, dug deeper and quickly uncovered the truth, revealing that they hadn't lost everything because of bad luck or misfortune, but rather because they had wasted every last cent on reckless spending, failed business ventures, gambling, and luxury vacations they couldn't afford. And as the truth spread, people demanded refunds, their GoFundMe was shut down for fraud, and the last remnants of their credibility and reputation were completely and utterly destroyed. But by then, I had long since stopped caring about them, because while they were busy trying to manipulate strangers into feeling sorry for them, I was walking across the stage in Washington, D.C., receiving a national award for my contributions to financial education and child welfare reform, standing in front of some of the most influential figures in the country, knowing that I had built something that truly mattered, something that would outlast me, something that would change lives. And as I accepted the award, I thought about the years I had spent feeling like I was nothing, like I would never be more than the child my parents had abandoned. But now, standing in that room, looking out at the faces of people who respected me not for my wealth, not for my success, but for the difference I had made, I knew, without a shred of doubt, that I had proved them wrong in every possible way, that I had built a life that was bigger than them, bigger than their betrayal, bigger than anything they had ever imagined for me. And for the first time in my life, I realized that I no longer carried any guilt, any resentment, or any pain, because the past wasn't mine to hold on to anymore. And for the first time, I truly felt free.